No climate summit has ever set an end date for the dirty fuels at the root of the climate crisis. Can COP28 signal the end of the fossil fuel era? The United Arab Emirates are the hosts of this year's UN meeting, an oil powerhouse at the helm of crucial negotiations. Welcome to this special COP28 edition of Down to Earth. This year, the world descends on the Gulf city of Dubai for another round of climate talks. Over the course of 2 weeks, the weight of the climate crisis will fall on one man, Sultan Al Jaber, who was appointed by the UAE to preside over the summit. Now, Al Jaber is also the chief of the country's national oil company, ADNOC. Activists say the controversial pick bears the hallmarks of fossil fuel interests and fear it could influence the final outcome.
Churning out 3.1 million barrels of oil per day, the UAE is a petrol powerhouse. Their promise at COP28, frank dialogue with the fossil fuels industry, with Sultan Al Jaber at the helm. Formerly CEO of the state renewables company Masdar, he says he was parachuted into the national oil company to decarbonise a dirty industry. But only last year, ADNOC announced a $150 billion expansion plan. Government minister and petrol CEO, many doubt Al Jaber's credibility as a climate leader.
The location and choice of president at this COP has made us wonder, do COPs still serve a purpose? Or is this just a charade? We're very worried about this presidency and the conflict of interest it represents, given his three positions.
But he argues on the contrary that his intimate knowledge of the oil business makes him the man for the job. Al Jaber has called a fossil fuel phase-down inevitable, but cautions against too hasty an exit in the name of energy security.
We cannot unplug the energy system of today before we build the new system of tomorrow.
The UAE are among the Gulf states lobbying for continued investment in new fossil fuel infrastructure, the country claiming that thanks to state-of-the-art technology, they have some of the cleanest petrol on the market. And as the host nation, they are in pole position to push this agenda.
The hosting of the COP will affect the atmosphere, which ultimately has an impact on the final outcomes.
After the oil and gas lobby sent over 600 delegates to COP27, scientists and NGOs fear their calls for an urgent phase-out of fossil fuels may fall on deaf ears in Dubai.
The science is clear. If countries are serious about reining in climate change, we must consign fossil fuels to history. But not everyone agrees on what the future looks like for oil, gas, and coal. Two alternative views are set to take center stage in Dubai: a phase-down or a phase-out of fossil fuels. 2 years ago, the COP26 summit put the spotlight on coal, the dirtiest hydrocarbon, countries agreeing to reduce the share of coal in the energy mix. Since then, calls have been mounting for oil and gas to join the club. That question is set to fire up tensions, but it's not the only one. Oil-producing countries argue that as long as the carbon emitted is captured, fossil fuels should still be part of the picture. That technology is called carbon capture and storage, or CCS. At COP28, that debate will revolve around one term: unabated fossil fuels. It refers to power plants without CCS technology to trap emissions, the opposite of abated. The problem is that there is no international definition of what CO2 abatement actually entails or how to measure it. And with that comes the risk of a fossil fuel exit simply getting lost in translation. For more on the future of fossil fuels and the energy transition, I'm joined by Dr. Fatih Birol, Executive Director at the International Energy Agency. Thank you very much for being on the program.
Thank you.
First of all, I would like to ask you about your projections for fossil fuel demand. In your latest World Energy Outlook, the IEA says that demand for oil, gas, and coal will peak by the end of this decade. Is the era of fossil fuels really coming to an end?
So when we look at the history of the countries and the global economy, decades and decades our economies were fueled by fossil fuels. And these energies gave us more productive economies, much more comfortable lives in many parts of the world. This is a good part of the story, but there is another part of the story because they are at the same time source of climate change and the climate crisis we are in. So what we are seeing today, that there are new energy sources, such as solar, such as wind, such as hydrogen, in some countries nuclear power making a comeback. When we look at all of them, I can tell you that a clean energy economy around the world is emerging, and emerging faster than many people realize. So I believe this decade will be the last decade that we will see the growth of fossil fuels around the world.
2030 is just 7 years from now, and many people will find it hard to believe that fossil fuel demand will peak in the next decade.
So many people think that some of the owners of the fossil fuel companies or the producing countries, fossil fuel consumption will increase infinitely. It will not happen. If you look at all the power plants built in the world, more than 80% are renewables. And it is not only for climate change, it is also because they are becoming cheaper. So therefore, clean energy is going to push the fossil fuels slowly but surely away from our energy mix. How fast it will be depending on the government policies, including the discussions and the outcomes of the COP28 in Dubai.
What are your expectations for COP28? What do you hope to see in Dubai?
We have high expectations, and we want to see that the renewables and energy efficiency will get a big push from the governments. But at the same time, I would like to see that the governments agree on an orderly decline of fossil fuels and take some measures there. If it is left only to the markets, it might be much more volatile, and it can cause a lot of economic damage. So it's good that the world comes together and designs an orderly decline of fossil fuels.
How do we make sure that this idea of energy security does not become an excuse for governments, fossil fuel companies to drag their feet?
Yeah. We cannot tomorrow leave oil and gas. This is true. But what is also true is that if we want to have a world which is more or less planet similar to today, we have to bring the oil, gas, and coal consumption down. There is no other way. And for the oil and gas companies, I tell them, the CEOs, it is not anymore the NGOs in France or in London or in New York. I see that the man in the street in New Delhi, women working at home in Jakarta, or the kids in Sao Paulo, they are now slowly but surely linking the extreme weather events and the fossil fuel companies. I think this is something important for them to consider.
I'd like to talk about the energy transition in developing countries. Across the global south, excluding China, investments in renewable energy have more or less remained flat since the Paris Agreement. How concerned are you that this could hinder the goals of the Paris Agreement?
For me, this is the fault line of our fight against climate change. When we look at the clean energy investments, it is growing. In Paris, when we hit the 2015 the agreement, clean energy investments in the world was about $1 trillion, and today it is close to $2 trillion. But all the increase came from the rich countries and China. What about the rest? What about the other countries in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa? If they are not able to turn to clean energy, it will have the same effect on the Europeans. So it will not change anything for Europeans what they do at home. It is the entire world, or for the Americans, or for Japanese and others. So therefore, we should understand that the emissions don't have a passport. We have to support the emerging and developing countries in order to finance the clean energy transitions.
A quick word on the 1.5 goal. In your opinion, has the 1.5 goal become more of a political objective, or is it still feasible?
The path going to 1.5 is getting narrower by day, but in my view, it is still open. Because on one hand, we see the emissions are going up, but we also see that the clean energy technology is going up very strongly. I very much hope that from COP28 from Dubai, we got an additional, a very strong momentum globally to accelerate the clean energy transitions, which would help to keep our 1.5 goal alive. And as International Energy Agency, we are in the global energy sector, we are happy to lead it.
That's it for this edition of Down to Earth. Make sure to follow our coverage of COP28 live from Dubai and Paris here on France 24. Stay tuned, more news coming up.